We'll get this audio on for you guys when officials come to the podium. See the sheriff there. We're going to go ahead and turn it over and listen to what Sheriff Judd can tell us.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here with you today, as well as Chief Garcia, to release some information that absolutely breaks our heart. You know, law enforcement officers are one big family, and certainly when it comes to the Lakeland Police Department and the Polk County Sheriff's Office, we are one agency. We wear different color uniforms, but we work together and we're all friends. And this is one more horrible example of what occurs to law enforcement officers in the line of duty. We know that about 5:45 this morning we received a 911 call about a vehicle crash. Upon our arrival, which was within just a couple of minutes, we discovered a lady here by the name of Madeline Sinclair. Madeline is the wife of a sheriff's deputy. In addition to that, there was Laura Lewis, who's a nurse practitioner, who was here doing CPR. What occurred, according to Madeline, she crested the hill northbound on Lakeland Highlands Road, and she said, I could see some lights in the road, but I couldn't tell what it was. She said, I was scanning the area and I saw nothing else other than something in the road. She said, as I came closer, the car that was next to me continued northbound. I saw it was a police officer and a motorcycle down in the road. She said, I stopped immediately. The nurse practitioner stopped. Other citizens stopped. And the nurse practitioner immediately begun CPR when she said that the officer had a faint pulse that went to no pulse at all. Of course, our traffic homicide team is here working the crash because it happened in unincorporated Polk County. We know that Officer Dunn was on his way to work, and certainly the chief will speak about that in just a minute. This is the very early stages of the investigation. So the information we release to you certainly is subject to modification as the investigation unfolds. We don't know at this time why his motorcycle left the roadway, hit the concrete median, obviously crashed, and Officer Dunn went down into the roadway. We don't know why that occurred. That's what the investigation's for, and it's underway at this time. Common sense would dictate that he was driving in the lane of travel and some other vehicle forced him off of the roadway. But we don't have any evidence at all to prove that at this point in the investigation. We will determine what occurred and why it occurred. So he was immediately rushed by Polk Fire Rescue to Lakeland Regional Hospital, where he was treated at the hospital by a remarkable team in the trauma unit. But I want to turn the microphone over to the chief so that he can give you the details on what was a fine law enforcement officer that we've obviously lost today, and it just sucks all the air and the energy out of us when we see something like this, when we're involved in something like this. So Chief, we're sorry,
Sure.
And I want to turn it over to you.
Good morning. As the sheriff said, we have suffered a tragic loss out here this morning. Officer Paul Dunn, 50 years of age, served with our agency about 5 years. He had served with the sheriff's office about 12 years before that. Before that, he was a United States Marine. Paul had raised his hand and volunteered more than most, and we certainly appreciate all the service that he has given up to this point. This morning, he was on the way with the rest of his unit to train, as they do monthly, and in his course of travels out there is when this accident occurred. So we're still very much in the preliminary stages, as the sheriff said. They are doing the investigation, it being in the county. Certainly we have 100% full confidence in their agency to do this investigation, and we appreciate all the support they have given us this morning. I would like to give a word of thanks to the citizens that stopped and did all they could to help, as well as our hospital staff that certainly took every tactic known to them to try to keep our officer alive. But other than that, it's a tragic loss for the agency and the community as well. And I'll answer any questions if you have them.
Is there video? There are cameras over there.
Yes, sir. As they work the crime scene, they're trying to collect any video that's in the area.
And will we get a copy of that? And what about the 911 tape?
At some point in time in the investigation, that'll certainly be released.
Not today, though?
They'll have to review it first, and once we determine it's releasable, it'll certainly be released as soon as possible.
Chief, can you talk about, I heard today is Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, and this is the second loss your department has had since December. Can you talk about just how your officers are dealing with this?
Yes, it strikes home as it would and with the loss of anyone in any profession. Law enforcement, by the very nature of what they do, seem to be a very close-knit profession, and this is a loss of a family member, make no mistake. It is certainly a huge loss to the entire agency, but no more so than it is to the community. This was a fine officer that worked for this community every day.
Can you tell us what shift he worked? What did he typically do?
He was a member of our traffic unit, a member of the motorcycle enforcement unit, and they work primarily a day shift to monitor traffic on the way in the mornings to work and on the way home from work, working the high congested areas, the school zone, stuff like that, just keeping the traffic safety.
Can you speak to how dangerous it is getting out there for officers of both agencies?
Law enforcement is a dangerous profession. We take every precaution we can to train and prepare, but it's a calling that these men and women accept, and we certainly do everything we can to support them in training and equipment to make it as safe as possible.
Are there any special commendations that Officer Dunn had received in his time with LPD?
He has certainly been a very active officer. I'm sure he has accommodations in his file. We haven't looked into the file yet this morning.
Is there any possibility that somebody could have cut him off, taken off, and not looked in the rearview mirror and seen something horrible was happening?
There's always a possibility with motorcycle traffic that the vehicle may influence their lane of travel. We don't know that. There's no indication of that, but that is certainly part of the investigation to rule that out.
But I'm saying if that happened, how could this, this hypothetical person just take off? Could you do that to someone and not realize it and not stop?
People do that. That's why we have the charge of leaving the scene of an accident, unfortunately.
There's obviously houses around this scene. Have you all talked to anyone? Have they potentially maybe have seen anything or heard anything that could have taken place this morning?
Yes, they're still in the preliminary stages of doing all the canvassing of the area, collecting any eyewitness information or any video information that may be available, as well as working the forensics of the scene.
There's a picture of Officer Dunn on Facebook. It has, there is always a reason to smile, you just have to find it. Is this a motto that he lived by? Does that speak to his character as a human being?
He was always a highly motivated, happy officer anytime I saw him.
How far away from the scene did he live?
Within a few miles.
Was he on his work motorcycle?
Yes.
Sheriff, can you tell us what your detectives are doing to figure out? I mean, I'm sure with this area near the high school, there had to be tons of people driving around him. Are you going and interviewing all the people who were driving by this way? Or?
Certainly, we do a complete and thorough investigation. The investigation we do is the same exact investigation that Lakeland Police would do in the city or that the Highway Patrol would do. There is a standard protocol on traffic homicide investigations because we want to find out the cause. And in order to do that, you take your science, you take your eyewitnesses, and you put it all together. It is a long, laborious process. We'll search out all the cameras, we'll work toward all the witnesses that we know of. Of course, we ask other witnesses to come forward if you were in the area before, during, or just after. We want to know. And certainly we can sit here and discuss what we think happened. We don't know what happened. All we know for sure at this point in the investigation is for reasons unknown, he left the roadway, hit a raised median, lost control of the motorcycle, ultimately crashed, and and it's horrible to say it, but he died as a result of the crash. Our job as traffic homicide investigators is to determine why and how that occurred, and they'll do that. We will leave no stone unturned. I can tell you clearly and unequivocally that I would stand here if it was one of my deputies and say, we will leave no stone unturned. We never do for anyone, but certainly about our law enforcement officers, our deputies. We'll do nothing any different because it's Lakeland Police. We will go above and beyond. We'll answer every question. We can never stop the conspiracy theorists. They've already figured this out, even though they have no idea. But I'm certain they're all over social media now discussing all the reasons for this. Well, if they know something, if they saw something, if they heard something, then say something to us, because we want to know why our Deputy Sinclair's wife crested a hill and saw a police officer and his motorcycle crashed in the middle of the northbound lanes and no one at all around. Because there's a lot of unanswered questions. But once again, you've got to understand that horrible events happen to people every day. That's why the community hires us to deal with that. But it's much more difficult on us. It becomes personal instead of just business. It's a tough business job to help and protect and serve and deal with the families of people who lose loved ones to crashes. We'll talk later today or tomorrow about a murder we worked last night. It's very difficult for us to do that under the best of circumstances. But then when it's one of your personal family, and that's what we're dealing with today. This is our family. We're together, and we're always together, not just on days like this. But we feel the same for the loss of this police officer, whether he's wearing a blue uniform or a green uniform or a brown uniform, because he was going to work to train so that he could keep people safe. And he died. And bad things happen to good people. And that's what happened this morning.
I want to make sure I'm clear how he, when he hit the median on the motorcycle, did that cause him to be ejected from the motorcycle?
The median is a concrete raised median. So when you hit it, it is elevated. That certainly would cause you to lose control of a motorcycle.
Do you believe he fell off of it?
He obviously was. He fell off or was ejected from the impact of the crash.
He was down in the roadway.
He was in the roadway, as was his motorcycle, when Mrs. Sinclair and Mrs. Lewis arrived on the scene.
And what's Mrs. Sinclair's relation?
She is a nurse practitioner who was on her way to work. So she was just a concerned citizen. That's why you've heard me say over and over, this is the most wonderful community in the world. Because when we run in to help people in distress, we saw our community run to us this morning when we were in distress. They didn't leave him out here by himself. They stopped to help. That's the kind of community we have in Lakeland and Polk County.
And when they got there were no other cars just sitting there waiting. It was just him laying in the road with the
When Mrs. Sinclair crested the hill and saw the flashers on the motorcycle, she said, I was scanning. I knew something was in the road, but I didn't know why or what. And she says, as I got closer, I saw the motorcycle and the police officer. And when she was scanning the road, she saw nothing other than the car that was traveling beside her north on Lakeland Highlands. That car proceeded on past, and she stopped. And shortly thereafter, Laura Lewis stopped. But once again, they ran to us this time to help, for which we're grateful. And I can tell you, to have an expert such as a nurse practitioner on the scene immediately, to have a deputy's wife who, through, if nothing else, osmosis, understands CPR and help, running to help folks, and a wonderful Polk Fire Rescue, and the deputies that immediately arrived with their AEDs, and wonderful trauma center, if he could have survived, he had all the help we could ever pray for immediately. It just wasn't enough.
How dark was it at the time?
It was dark. It was very dark. It was.
Did he have his helmet on, and was it thrown off during the crash?
He had his helmet on. I don't know at what point in time, if his helmet came off during the crash or if they took it off during him. That will be part of the investigation, but certainly he was wearing, from everything we see early in the investigation, all of his emergency equipment that he should have been wearing. He was a very conscientious police officer. I know from when he worked with us.
You said his flashers were on. What are the? Is that?
Well, I learned something new today. With these new Harley motorcycles when the motorcycle goes down, the flashers automatically turn on. So you get the four-way flashers just so someone behind you sees that there's problems in the roadway.
So he had a new motorcycle?
It's relatively new, yes, within a year or so.
Chief, can you tell us, is he married? Does he have kids, grandkids?
Yes, he is married. He is married to one of our detectives that serves with the Lakeland Police Department as well. He has 3 adult children, 1 local daughter, and 2 sons that are both serving in the military now.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll release more information later today when we have it.
Thank you.
Digital reporter Daisy Ruth back with you live now. Everyone have procession. We'll have the procession. There we go. Up live now as we recap. So, Sheriff Judd mentioned that this crash happened today at 5:45 a.m. 2 women, one being a wife of a sheriff's deputy, came across Officer Dunn after this crash. One of these women was a nurse practitioner who was able to do CPR on Officer Dunn. But Grady mentioned that his faint pulse after the crash went to no pulse at all. And he mentioned that these 2 women, the wife of the sheriff's deputy is named Madison Sinclair, and I apologize, was not able to write down the name of the nurse practitioner fast enough, but she was a nurse practitioner who was on scene. They were on scene immediately, the sheriff mentioned. This happened in unincorporated Polk County, and that's why the sheriff's office traffic homicide unit is investigating. I think the most important thing to take away from this update is that they still don't know why Officer Dunn's motorcycle left the road. Sheriff Judd says they don't have any evidence that another vehicle was involved, but Grady called that common sense, that there would be another vehicle involved, but they don't have any evidence to support that right now. The sheriff said all they know for sure is, for reasons unknown, Officer Dunn's motorcycle left the road, hit the median, and he died as a result. The sheriff says they will leave no stone unturned. They never do for anybody, but he said certainly not for a law enforcement officer. The Lakeland police chief was also on scene of this press conference and spoke. He said his officer served with the agency for about 5 years, with the sheriff's office about 12 years before that. And before that, even, he was a Marine. Officer Dunn was on his way to training, and the police chief says he's thankful for the citizens who stopped here in this accident. I see that comment. I will go ahead and put my audio up. Apologize, guys. He's thankful for the citizens who stopped, and he says the police chief says this is a loss of a family member. Make no mistake. He also says Officer Dunn is married to a police department detective. They have 3 adult children. One is local in Polk County, or here in the Tampa Bay area, and he has 2 sons who are currently serving in the military. As you can see here, we still have the procession to the hospital. Eagle 8 HD is live over the hospital, or the procession to the hospital. Just to recap, 50-year-old Officer Dunn, Lakeland Police Department, was killed in a motorcycle crash on his way to work this morning. As we just heard from Sheriff Grady Judd, 2 citizens were on scene. One was the wife of a sheriff's deputy, and one woman was a nurse practitioner who actually began doing CPR. And Sheriff Judd says the officer had a faint pulse when she began CPR. It faded to no pulse at all, but these women were on scene immediately. This happened around 5:45 a.m. in unincorporated Polk County. That's why the traffic homicide unit of the sheriff's office is investigating. And once again, to reiterate, the sheriff's office does not have any evidence that another vehicle was involved, but Sheriff Grady Judd called that common sense. You take that as you will. As to speculate, we can speculate. The sheriff's office will investigate. Sheriff says all they know for sure is that for reasons unknown, the motorcycle left the roadway, hit the median, he lost control, and the officer died as a result. Really tragic day in Polk County, especially as we've been mentioning here on stream on Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. And take this full, as we finish up our recap, we have this stream live on our Facebook page as well after I log off here with you now. If you want to continue to watch, we have this up live for you. So once again, guys, the sheriff's office does not know why Officer Dunn's motorcycle left the road. They don't have any information that another vehicle was involved. If you were listening to the press conference, the sheriff sounded very emotional. The Lakeland police chief sounded emotional as well. They said this is a loss of a family member. Make no mistake. They'll leave no stone unturned. They would never do that for anybody, but certainly not for a law enforcement officer, according to the sheriff. Judd also did not mention if there would be another press conference this afternoon or this evening if they received that information that another vehicle was involved or any indication of why the motorcycle left the road, but you can be certain that if there is another press conference, if there is any other update, we will be live with you here on WFLA Now. If you would like to continue watching this procession, we have that live on our Facebook page as well. But for now, thank you guys so much for joining me on this tragic day. I've been digital reporter Daisy Ruth, and we'll talk to you if there is an update immediately. Thanks for tuning in.